Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. A report that a Chinese billionaire fathered more than 100 U.S. children poses a monumental human rights issue. Jennifer Roback Morse joins us. Jennifer is the founder, Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse, founder and president of the Ruth Institute, which helps the victims of the sexual revolution recover from their experiences and become advocates for positive change. Jennifer, great to speak with you again. I always enjoy reconnecting with you. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks for having me on, Marcus.
Let's talk about this story. Thank you for your piece in the National Catholic Register. Let's talk about the story in case our listeners don't know what has happened.
Well, I found it in the Wall Street Journal of all places, because usually the Wall Street Journal is all in favor of anything that the market does, you know. But in this case, even the Wall Street Journal is scratching its head because this is a case of not just one. There was one Chinese billionaire that they talked about quite a bit, but there were several who basically used the US surrogacy laws to sire an army of children, basically. So this one guy who's a video game maker, you know, lots and lots of money, kind of a recluse, kind of a little bit nerdy, different kind of guy, probably, you know, the vibe that you get. But, you know, he commissioned, he's looking to create 100 high-quality sons who can take over his business when he's old. He's trying to create a dynasty. And the journal went on to report on other similarly wealthy Chinese nationals who wanted to have a bunch of girls and then marry their daughters off to, important world leaders and this kind of thing, you know. And, of course, there are problems. The journal was also interested in the fact that these kids could count as American citizens because if they used a U.S. surrogate and they're born in the United States, you know, they could count as a U.S. citizen. So there are any number of problems that could be that could arise from this situation. The thing that I really wanted to call attention to and to make a point of is, what about these kids? You know, what in the world are we doing to these children? By what right are we doing such a thing that a man would go and purchase genetic material and then purchase the services of a rent-a-womb, basically, and then arrange to have his children, these children assigned to him as the father in a hearing in Los Angeles that he didn't even show up to? You know, he wants parental rights, but he can't even be bothered to show up. What in the world kind of life are these kids going to have? And I think that I think it's absolutely time for people to open their eyes and say, look, the fertility industry is much more than the smiling faces of babies that you see on the brochures of an IVF clinic. There's a lot of very dark business hiding behind those smiling baby pictures. And this is... I don't know if this is as bad as it gets, but it's bad enough. Wouldn't you think, Marcus?
Oh, I certainly think so. And the tragic irony of this is, of course, he targets the United States for a number of reasons, economic being chief among them. But the other reason is surrogacy is illegal in China. And the irony of that all. Yeah,
exactly. We're buying and selling people over here. I mean, that's really what it amounts to. So the U.S. market is completely unregulated. And my position is, and I think the church's position is, you cannot regulate this enough to make it okay. You know, it's fundamentally wrong to be buying and selling people. And we have to come back to the church's teaching that every person has the right, the natural human right, to come into existence as a result of the loving embrace of their own mother and father who love each other. You know, they love each other, and their love produces you, the child, the new baby. Some of us have that right, and some of us now do not, and categorically do not have that right. And we're acting as if this is no big deal, but in fact, it's a huge deal, and we're just sleepwalking into it. You know,
the further heartbreak of the situation is owing to the way surrogacy contracts are written up. These children, because clearly this man, Zhu Bo, has no desire to raise the children himself. So the birth mothers, the biological mothers, will not raise the children. He will not raise the children. So you've got 100, for want of a better expression, orphans in just out there in U.S. society that he wants to claim as a right to parent.
Yeah. So these children have two mothers, actually. They have a genetic mother who is different from the gestational mother. Okay, so think about, well, already that's a problem, right? Even if it wasn't a billionaire who had 100 of them like that, there's already a breakdown in the identity of the mother, of the maternal bond doesn't mean the same thing that it should mean and that it means to most people and throughout all of human history. The other thing that came out in the article is just how efficient this little market is. Well, actually, it's a huge market in the sense that it's not that there are so many people who want these services, but the people who want these services have a lot of money. And so they describe the fact that, a wealthy person in a foreign country can commission a certain number of children. There are agencies that will help them. And they literally use this phrase that one guy had placed an order for 100 babies. Okay, placed an order. Think about that. He placed an order for children. And these agencies are running around recruiting the donors, recruiting egg donors, recruiting the surrogates. They even have the services where they'll pick the baby up for you. They'll transfer all the paperwork around for you. There'll be nannies when you need the nannies, all this type of stuff that they'll do to make it easier for you to have the baby that you want for about $200,000. All this whole concierge package will cost you. So what we've got here, Marcus, is a system where people with money get to do anything they want. And I just can't see how you can redeem the system like that.
You look at the language of the system, the kind of language that came out. I'm really glad you quoted it. They helped fill an order for a Chinese parent. See, I'm a father of very young children. My bride and I know the struggles of having children, wanting children, and having children. To see this is legitimately interiorly infuriating.
Yeah. And the infertility industry, as it happens, Marcus, back in the 1980s, when my husband and I wanted to start a family, we found that we couldn't right away. And we had a long struggle with infertility. And the IVF was just starting to be a thing. And I was repulsed by it. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. But what I remember from that period of time very clearly, of course, infertility is a miserable experience. And I will not take anything away from somebody's grief over being unable to conceive naturally. I do understand. I really do. But the fact is, the infertility industry preys on the vulnerability of that couple. And we saw many couples go through this process, Marcus, where every cycle they would get so, elated and then crash, elated and then crash. And it created tension within the married life because, generally speaking, it was the woman who was desperate to have the baby, and the father's trying to figure out, the husband's trying to figure out, I want to make my wife happy, but this is really not a good thing. And so and the industry just fed all of that, right? And they preyed upon the person's vulnerability. Whereas what we chose to do was to adopt. And with adoption, every step you take, you release the idea that you're going to have a baby. Just let go of that. I'm never going to have a baby. I'm at peace with that. So you make peace with that. And then every step you take, you actually do come closer to a baby. I had 2 long days in the immigration office to get my little boy to come from Romania. All the home studies and doctor's appointments, all that stuff that you have to go through to do an adoption. But as you do it, you actually are coming closer to a baby. Whereas with the big tech fertility industry, you can go at it, cycle after cycle and never come closer to the baby. You know what I mean? And so they're just feeding on that. It's predatory, and it's predatory on the women who are donating their eggs. Sometimes at more risk to themselves than they realize. I'm just going to say it that way, because there are problems with that. It's a predatory industry, and the whole thing should be stinking shut down. That's my opinion.
I agree, and the sooner we get there, the better. Jennifer, thank you so much. My guest has been Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse, founder and president of the Ruth Institute. We've been talking about this horrendous case of a Chinese national who, through surrogacy, has fathered more than 100 children in the United States, and the concerns that this raises about the surrogacy industry. I'm Marcus Peter.